I'm going to start this off by saying that I don't mean to justify some of the things that American railroads have done recently, and I don't mean to make it seem like I have some kind of blind acceptance toward them and that nothing's wrong, everything is fine, there's nothing bad going on in the railroad industry right now, because obviously we all know that's definitely not true. This current state of the railroad industry is definitely not a great one, and it's far from perfect, but that's the whole point that I want to talk about, because while it's very far from perfect, at the same time, I wouldn't consider that the American railroads are all just greedy tyrants who are suck-ups to the Wall Street, who we are all suffering under. So, let's talk about that. So yeah, I'm talking about the American railroads and why I do not hate them with every fiber of my being. And you might be wondering, train person, how do you not hate such terrible companies who have done such terrible things? How could you? Well, I have several reasons for that. But one of the big reasons that I wanted to bring up was the comparing American railroads of today to the fallen flags of years past. And basically fallen flags, if you don't know, are basically just the American railroads that came before, and the current railroads are just the current incarnations of them, just being merged together and all that. So the thing about fallen flags is a lot of rail fans like them, and that's totally understandable. I really like fallen flags too. I enjoy seeing fallen flag railroads on freight trains as much as the next rail fan. I think they're great. What I don't really agree with is when fallen flags are treated like some perfect, flawless corporation, and when they're compared with the railroads of today, it's like the fallen flags are just oh so perfect, and that the railroads of today are just terrible in comparison, and that they could never be as good as the railroads of old, and that the railroads of today are like the only ones who have done anything bad, and that the fallen flags are just so good. And you get what I mean. Fallen flags are treated with a lot of nostalgia and favor, which, I mean, I can kind of understand that. Fallen flags are really nice, like I said, but at the same time, the case that I want to make here is that the fallen flags were definitely far from perfect also, and they had a lot of the same flaws that our current railroads are dealing with today. Now, granted, it's not in like the exact same form. They had different problems going on back then. So it's not like it's not a complete copy, but it's a similar pattern. So let me explain. So one of the big things that has been attributed to modern railroads is the big mergers. Of course, nowadays we only have 6 Class 1 railroads in all of the United States when we used to have dozens. We used to have a lot of railroads, and now it's come down to only half a dozen, which of course is not that much. And while it would have been great to live in a time when there were many different railroads scattered across the country, and that is a period of time that a lot of rail fans are nostalgic for, at the same time, if we do want to go back to those days, we are going really, really far back in railroad history, because this has been a part of railroading in America for decades now. It's not like this is a new topic. It is far from new. I'll just give an example. In the 1960s alone, over 50 years ago, we had a bunch of mergers. We had the Erie-Lackawanna merger. There was the Seaboard Coastline merger. Norfolk and Western acquired Wabash and Nickel Plate Road. The Southern Railway acquired the Central of Georgia, and of course, biggest of all, there was the Penn Central merger. All of this happened in just the 1960s, and it only increased in the following decades as the railroads got fewer and fewer. And this has been happening even before the 60s. In 1959, the Norfolk and Western acquired the Virginian Railroad. 1959. N&W hadn't even gotten rid of all their steam engines yet. So, yeah, that's kind of a long time ago. So, in saying all this, my point is that mergers have been a long time thing. They are far from new. This has been a thing for a while now. So, if we want to go back to the days of many railroads scattering the country, which, I mean, that would have been nice, but that was quite a ways ago. So there's all the stuff about mergers, and another thing that has been another characteristic of modern railroading is Amtrak, and specifically Amtrak's notoriety, if I can talk, for not being on time. And of course, what is one of the biggest reasons for Amtrak not being on time? The freight railroads not being very nice to Amtrak. Now, in saying this, I've actually watched the documentary by Wendover Productions, if some of you have heard of it. There's this YouTube channel called Wendover Productions, and they made this documentary about a year ago talking about how there is this law that should grant Amtrak priority, but of course the freight railroads don't really follow that all that much. And don't get me wrong, that was an insightful documentary. It was well made, and it is very true. The freight railroads should be giving Amtrak more credit than they have been. And yet, one thing that I don't really agree with is that this, again, like with the mergers, this has been a problem for a really long time now. It's not like this has only existed in the 2020s. It's happened in the 2010s, it's been a problem in the 2000s, and it's probably been a problem even before then. So, again, not a new problem. It's not just a characteristic of the precision-scheduled railroading dystopia that we are struggling to survive in. So, yeah. And the act that Wendover Productions was referring to, that's supposed to give Amtrak priority, that is the Amtrak Improvement Act, which was passed in 1973. And I saw this article by Railway Age, which talked a little bit about that law. And they said that one of the reasons that law was passed in the first place was because Amtrak trains were getting stuck in freight train gridlocks on the Northeast Corridor. Sound familiar? Amtrak trains getting stuck in freight rail traffic jams. Gee, that's familiar. So, yeah, again, another idea which has been around for a while. It's not like we're the only ones to have seen this problem. Of course, it's a lot bigger now, and of course, it should still be solved, but we're not the only ones. And the last thing I'm kind of going to bring up in comparing fallen flags to modern railroads is all of the labor disputes. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will remember just last year in 2022, we just narrowly avoided a railroad strike, like a nationwide railroad strike, I believe. We got really close to that. And of course, that wasn't great. And that's because it's true that the freight railroads do not treat their workers the greatest. And of course, they should. They should be treating their workers better. That is true. And we were just narrowly able to avoid a strike. But that's the thing, though. We were able to narrowly avoid a strike, but in railroad history, we had actual strikes occur in the early 1990s. There were strikes in the early 1950s on the Rutland Railroad. There were strikes in the mid-1940s. There were strikes in the early 1920s. So, you already know I'm going to say it. This has been a problem for a really long time. There have been railroad strikes and labor issues, maybe even more that I didn't even mention, throughout American railroad history. It's not just happening in this era. It's not like we're the only ones stuck with this problem. This has been going on for a long time now. Now, of course, that's not okay that it's been going on for a long time. Of course, that doesn't mean you can just write it off and say, oh, that's just how it's been. I mean, if there is ability for change, of course, we should change it as much as we possibly can. That would be great. That would be nice. And that applies for a lot of these things. Railroads should be treating Amtrak better. Railroads should be treating their workers better. That is all very important. But it's not like our freight railroads of today are the only ones doing this, and as a result, it's not exactly like they're the only tyrants who are the puppet masters of the United States transportation industry. So, yeah, that's why I don't really agree with that sort of image that the freight railroads have been painted in, because, I mean, has it really been much better in history? Of course, they didn't have some of the same stuff that we do now. Like, of course, they didn't have, like, PSR. I mean, PSR has been a thing for a while now. If I remember correctly, I think Hunter Harrison, who was the guy who invented PSR, I think that he came up with the idea in the 1990s, but of course, it took a while for it to be implemented system-wide. So, yeah, we have some unique issues now that weren't so much of a thing back then. But either way, the idea is these general problems have been a thing for a long time. And the truth is, I don't know if we'll ever have a completely perfect, flawless system. And while it is true that American railroads do have quite a bit to figure out, and again, this leads back to my disclaimer of I don't intend to seem like I'm justifying some of this, or that it's all okay, there's nothing wrong. That's not what I mean to say. I mean, there is quite a bit wrong, and it's not justified. Yeah. But, at the same time, I also just don't want to see American freight railroads in some kind of cynical, nihilistic point of view, in that I don't want to think like, oh, they'll never get better, and they're all just these terrible companies who don't do anything good. They only care about themselves and don't give a flying crap to anyone, except Wall Street, of course. Like, I'd rather not look at the freight rail companies like that. I'd rather go rail fanning with, a open mind, thanks, instead of just going, ew, that railroad, ew. Yeah, like, no, I don't, like I said, I don't want to be looking at American railroading in some kind of pessimistic, cynical light. Again, like I said, there is quite a bit wrong here, and there's definitely some things that need to be fixed, but at the same time, it's not like the entire industry is going to be like crashing and burning and going down in flames. I mean, yeah, it's not great, but I don't know if this is like, I wouldn't consider it like a dystopia or anything. So that's my viewpoint on that. And I know that people have genuine reasons for not liking the current railroads, and people have genuine reasons for liking fallen flags. I get that. That's fine. But at the same time, it's not like I don't really want to consider the modern railroads as like these heartless, soulless groups, I guess. And the thing is that modern railroads have actually done some nice things. That's actually happened. Look at all the heritage units that they've made over the years, and the veterans units, and the first responders units. Like, look at all those, and not just in heritage units. In, I think, 2021 or 22, BNSF helped restore Santa Fe 5704 back to its bicentennial paint. And in 2019, to help out with the restoration of steam locomotive NC St. Hel 576, CSX donated 2 boxcars loaded with equipment to help out with the restoration. Now, with all these examples I mentioned, you could argue that, the railroads were just doing that to make themselves look good and to get some good publicity. And even if that is true for some of them, for some of it, I'd like to think that some of it's, like, actually genuine, especially, like, CSX donating the boxcars to the 576 restoration effort. Like, if they really were just trying to get good boy brownie points and good publicity, they probably would have just donated like a few $1,000s and given a little speech and called it a day. That's what they would have done if they did try to just go the simple, make themselves look good route. And yet they donated 2 boxcars loaded with equipment to help out the restoration effort. I'd like to believe that there's some level of genuine goodwill in that. So, yes, in saying all of this, the railroad companies are far from perfect. But will they ever be 100% perfect? And I don't want to start this whole contest of which railroad was the best and which railroad was the worst, because we'll say that for another day. That's not what I'm trying to say here. And I don't want to be pointing fingers saying this railroad did this, but this railroad did this. I mean, I know I kind of did that with the fallen flags and the mergers, but I mean, I still like those railroads. I just gave those as examples. But the point is, in saying all this, yes, modern railroading is far from perfect. Yes, we have a lot to figure out, or the American railroads have a lot to figure out, but I mean, it's not like they'll never be able to do actually good things. I still want to have at least some hope and give them at least a little grace, because at the end of the day, they are still helping our country in some way or another, even if they do make a lot of mistakes along the way. The railroads still play an important part in our country's shipping industry. So that was just my opinion on that. I just wanted to just give the freight railroads just a little credit. I mean, not too much, obviously, because again, I don't want to justify any of the bad stuff, obviously. But that was just my stance on that. And I guess to end this off, I guess I'll just ask, what do you guys think of the current state of freight railroading? Do you think it will get better? Do you think it might take a little bit of time? Just let me know what you think about that. Hopefully this is the most controversial I ever get. Sorry about that. But yeah, that should be about it. Thank you for listening. And I guess I'll see you next time in the Iron Horse Stables.